Hello, everybody, or whoever decides to tune into this. I'm a big fan of a lot of the channels here on YouTube that do radio demonstrations, and I decided to do one of my own. And I figured I'd start out with an extremely common radio. This is a Sony that is available at Walmart, a lot of drugstores. It's one of the very, very few that you can actually walk into a store today and find. I figure it's as good a place as any to start. First off, if you want to figure out what your radio is capable of, or what any radio is capable of, the way to do it is during the daytime in a place where there is little to no radio frequency interference. Your average house in this day and age has cheap, no transformer, switch mode power supplies, which just eat radio frequency for dinner. They dump a ton of garbage and static into the air, so you can't really hear what a radio is capable of when you're surrounded with a bunch of static and garbage. Point two, so what you do is you go find a park or a little spot in the woods someplace away from power lines and away from housing and away from any place that would have all these things that emit static, and so you can get a good assessment of what the radio can pick up. But as far as this particular radio goes, let me start out with the negatives first. Maybe it's my own idiosyncrasies, but there's a couple of pet peeves that I have about radios in general. Number one, I don't like this kind of dial. I don't. It's annoying. I don't know why in the hell anybody would put all of the numbers on one end of the scale with the needle down here. That just doesn't make sense to me. It makes it too difficult to see where you are on the dial. Part two is this has a stereo headphone jack, which most things do in this day and age, but at the cost of $20, why this doesn't have a multiplex, FM stereo chip in it is something that I don't really understand. 2019, there's no reason not to include FM stereo, especially at this price point. And I don't really think this is me being too critical. This, I have no idea what they were thinking here. This was a really bad idea. This should be inside the case. Now, because of this, it doesn't fit in the hand very well. And, I'd even go so far as to remove this and just hook a simple wire up to get this out of the way. But unfortunately, this plastic piece isn't removable. It is stuck inside of the plastic that is this part of the cabinet. You cannot do away with that. Also, please forgive the quality of the audio and the video. I'm doing this on a handheld $30 smartphone. Okay, so what we're going to do here is a daytime medium wave / AM band scan, mostly searching for weak signals. And, not to spoil the show or anything, but I'm going to tell you that this thing is amazingly capable, despite it being a good old-fashioned, super heterodyne. And I can tell you the difference between, or how you can spot the difference between a normal, super heterodyne analog tuned radio and DSP, everything on one chip radio, without even turning the thing on. Check the dial on the receiver. You note that it's not linear. The middle spot on the AM radio dial is 1100. So a DSP radio, such as this very well worn Rat Shack, possibly one of the last of the Rat Shacks, you know, that 120 is a little bit off the center. There's not this big gap in between the low and the high end of the band. The middle is actually the middle of the dial. That's how you know it's DSP without even having to turn the thing on. DSP does very much have an advantage in that it is a lot more selective. If the band spread is set properly, the filter is set properly, you can pick out one station from another a lot better than you can on a receiver such as this. There is a little bit of a lack of not sensitivity, but selectivity on this radio. But what they did was they chose what I think of at least as a good compromise in between bandwidth for good quality sound, especially through headphones, versus selectivity. The higher the bandwidth, the more high frequency sound can come through. But if you go too far with it, then you're going to have one station on top of the other. As a matter of fact, back in the 50s and 60s, they used to sell crystal sets as, high fidelity components, because you could get beyond even FM quality sound out of AM if you just kill all the selectivity. But anyway, let's start our band scan and let's see what this thing can do, shall we? Okay, first off, I'm going to start out with some very serious hardcore DX. This is 530 out of Cuba. My location is Lakeland, Florida. I'm in between Tampa and Orlando, maybe 20 miles closer to Tampa than I am Orlando. I'm also a good 30 miles inland. I do not know, the power of the station is probably 50,000 or maybe even more than 50,000 watts, but this is daytime. This is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's absolutely no chance of any kind of bounce off the ionosphere. This is strictly ground wave. And yeah, I understand that it's not particularly clear, but again, keep in mind that we're talking about, hardcore DX here. This is 560 WQAM out of Miami, which is 5,000 watts and 200 miles away from here as the crow flies. Again, not exactly clear, but it is there. WBOB, 50,000 watts out of Jacksonville, 150 miles away as the crow flies. And actually the camera actually introduces quite a bit of static. That's why I'm holding it so far away. This is 790 out of Leesburg with a whopping 950 watts. Okay, this one is really unfair, as I've only seen a handful of radios be able to pull this one in. But despite being 35 miles away from Tampa Bay, inland, with a really good radio such as Panasonic RF-2200 or one of the GE Super radios, I can pull in 870 out of New Orleans during the daytime. There's no way that, anyone would expect this radio to, and it's not. I mean, nothing to be disappointed about here, that it wasn't going to happen. $1660 out of Fort Myers, Florida with 5,000 watts, which is also about maybe 175 miles away as crow flies. All the way at the top of the dial, 1700 AM out of Miami with 5,000 watts. This is about 200 miles as the crow flies. So why highlight a bunch of staticky AM signals that you can barely hear? Well, that's exactly the point, to show what the radio is capable of doing. Any radio will pick up local stations just fine. This one can actually reach down into the fringes, which is really surprising for what it is. As far as sound quality goes, well, here you go. I'm going to keep this short to keep from getting into copyright problems. Hey babe, the sky's on fire, I'm dying. Unfortunately, it sounds like a transistor radio, which is actually what it is. And, you know, maybe I'm nitpicking here a little bit again, but, well, over the past few years, they've developed a system with a sealed enclosure with a passive radiator on the back of it, which gives off much better sound. I'm not sure why they didn't bother to implement that on this particular radio, but they did not. The headphone sound is pretty good. It's actually really good on both AM and FM, but again, in mono for whatever bizarre reason. It's actually one of the better sounding AM radios that I've ever gotten a hold of when it comes to headphone sound. It actually has quite a bit of output too, despite the you know standard two AA batteries, and the lifespan of the batteries in this thing is actually really quite incredible too. Sony, under their Walkman brand, has produced some really wimpy radios and etc. When it comes to output power, they're really shy away from any kind of dynamic range or any kind of power that would make their sounds make their equipment sound reasonable. But this thing does a lot better than a normal Walkman would, minus the lack of stereo sound. Well, so there you go. That is the Sony ICF-P26, available pretty much everywhere, which is kind of amazing at this point. Lack of demand has made, you know, radios very difficult to find in this day and age. Good luck walking into someplace and actually being able to find a radio, but this one is available pretty much the Walmart, or God help you if you walk into a Walmart in the first place. Personally, well, we'll save that rant for later on. Not a bad radio. I'm happy with it, other than that stupid antenna thing. Oh, and FM performance is better than adequate. It's a little bit better than average when it comes to, you know, normal super heterodyne radio. It's not quite up to the DSP chip, so, you know, if you really want to hear those same 20 records repeated over and over and over and over and over and over again, this will do a fine job of it. Not to critique what's on the radio in this day and age. AM with their, you know, propaganda and just same thing all up and down the dial. I'll kind of leave that there, but they're for what it's worth, there are a few independents that are starting to come through on AM now, and we have a couple of really good music stations here. One of them is Boss Hog Radio 1360, where the Josh get to play whatever the hell they want to, which is really refreshing. There's one AM, like, oldie station that used to be AM stereo, but unfortunately it pulled the plug on the CQUOM and went to an FM translator, just like everybody else did. Yawn. And there is the music for old farts on 1230, which is sort of interesting to listen to. But other than that, yeah, I don't think that it is the old, you know, way of doing things, or the radio in itself, that is a problem as much as the programming is just, no wonder nobody wants to bother with radio anymore with what's out there to listen to. But that's a rant for another time. Thanks for tuning in.